Bassi while people join. And then I will introduce our speaker. Daniela, you can start the video.
Laura was born on 29 of October 1711. In 1732, she earned the degree of Doctor in Philosophy from the University of Bologna. A few months later, because of her remarkable scientific skills, the Senate of the University assigned her an honorary position at the chair of Philosophia Universa, that is, of natural philosophy. In the following years, the young woman continued to study. In 1738, she married Giuseppe Veratti, a doctor in medicine who shared with his wife a keen interest in the study of nature. In 1745, Pope Benedict XIII admitted Laura Bassi among the elite group of scholars named Benedictine academics, but only as a supernumerary and not without resistance. Filling this role, she had to present at least one original dissertation a year. In this way, Laura played an active role inside the Bolognese scientific community. For performing her talks, Laura carried out several experiments with her husband in her own home, in a special laboratory that the couple had equipped with the most advanced tools and machines of the time. This laboratory was used not only for her personal research, but also for the private lessons in experimental physics that Laura Bassi held for philosophy and medical students of the university. The almost 30 years of high-level lessons held by Laura at her home earned her the assignment of the position, this time effective, of Professor of Experimental Physics in the Institute of Sciences in 1776. Only 2 years later, on the morning of February 20, 1778, Laura Bassi died suddenly after having participated in a session of the Academy of Sciences the previous evening. This woman, a forerunner of female emancipation, remains an admirable example for all women of science still today.
So, welcome to the February Laura Bassi Series Colloquium. Today we have the honor, it's a great pleasure for me and truly an honor to present today's speaker, Vanessa McBride. We were supposed to have 2 speakers, but unfortunately Carolina could not make it. She has an urgent personal matter to attend to, so Vanessa will excellently do the job alone today. She is an astronomer at the Office of Astronomy for Development of the IAU, and also an adjunct associate professor at the University of Cape Town. And she's been working towards bridging the gap between the community of professional astronomers and the development world. I've had the pleasure of meeting personally Vanessa in the past, and her work, I can say that her work truly inspires me. So today she's gonna tell us about women in astronomy for development. And I'm personally gonna very happily listen to what she has to say, and I hope it will be interesting for you as it is for me. Take it away, Vanessa.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Let me just share my screen. Right, is that working okay? I assume somebody will interrupt if it's not.
Not
so,
really. No.
Thank you very much for hosting me here today. It's a real pleasure to be here and in fact to watch the video of Laura Bassi. As Sarah said, I was supposed to be jointly presenting this with my colleague Carolina Ödman, and you'll see her. Has it stopped sharing?
No, it works now. I can see it fine now. Something is happening.
Let's try it again.
Vanessa, yeah, we might have some connection issues. Okay, now I can see you. You froze for a minute. Go ahead, try sharing again.
Let's go again. Sorry.
No worries.
Can you see the slides?
Okay. Yes, perfectly fine now. We don't hear you anymore.
Okay, so so you'll see Carolina featuring in some of. Okay.
Seems like there's some connection issues.
Yeah, I think there's quite a delay on the line, so apologies for that, but I assume it's working and it'll interrupt me if it stops again. So as we know, tomorrow is the 11th of February, and congratulations on running this seminar series for a year. So it's really inspiring to be able to use
So I'm afraid we're experiencing some connection issues. Yeah, I think unfortunately, she dropped out of the connection altogether. Let's wait for her to join us again. Let's see. Oh, okay, here she is.
Oh, so sorry. I think I should be doing this talk from home, it seems. Got a much better network connection from home than from the office.
Now it works. It seems to be working fine now.
Okay.
Works great.
And much less delay, thank you. So I think I probably don't need to repeat these statistics because I'm sure many of you have seen them before. Globally, about a third of all researchers are women. And whilst there's gender parity often in life sciences, in many of the physical sciences, engineering and mathematical fields, the representation is still quite low. And then that representation actually decreases significantly as you go higher up in seniority. So if you look at the sort of National Science Academy level, then you only have about 10%, 10 to 12% women. And of course, at the Nobel Prize level, there's very few, only 58 women have received Nobel Prizes compared to almost 900 men. So these statistics are things that one can gather from a large amount of work that has been done in this area by UNESCO and the Gender Insight reports. But I think what we see in academia is really just a reflection of what's happening, in our society in general. And we can see that there's still significant work to be done in achieving gender equality in other parts of society, in terms of basic education. Even we can see some of these statistics on the left here from health sciences, where, it's actually health workers, where most health workers are actually female, yet the decision-making bodies of health workers are dominated by men. And so we can see that this is, the sort of gender equality is an issue that pervades society as a whole and is not specific, of course, just to science. And so if we show here the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, you can see it's a beautiful color diagram, but shows some 17 focal points for the next decade up to 2030 of ways in which we would like to see socioeconomic conditions in the world improve. And those range from things like clean water and sanitation, preservation of life, making sure everyone has good access to healthcare, to things like managing work and economic growth, quality education, and of course, gender equality. So using this as a kind of a starting point, what on earth has astronomy got to do with some of these sustainable development goals? And I like to use this kind of picture of the wheel of astronomy to show the many facets which astronomy influences. So on these sort of green circles, on the green side of the circle, you can see that astronomy is applied physics, it's using chemistry, sometimes even earth sciences, statistical techniques to understand the light and the messengers we see from space and to make inferences about astrophysical objects. And of course, more than that, if you look at the purple side, you realize the amount of advanced technology and skills that go into interpreting those messengers. High precision optics, things like big data and techniques around that, looking at signal processing, solid state physics for detectors. All of those technology and skills also underpin the study of astronomy. But then a very interesting aspect of astronomy is also the way it relates quite strongly to our cultures and our societies. And we find that many cultures across the globe have got sort of close ties with astronomy, whether it's through star law or through a connection with ancestors, or whether it's through ideas of, our place in the universe and the evolution and a sense of perspective, or even potentially global citizenship and global stewardship. And of course, as many of us have seen, we also use astronomy as a gateway to other sciences, just using the sort of wonder that it captures. Tool to try and bring us to addressing some of these larger sustainable development goals. So you may ask, how do you bring these two things together? Well, I think many of us will find that we do it even sometimes without knowing in the work that we do on a daily basis. For example, many of us have run capacity building workshops, schools workshops, teachers training that really focus on providing quality education. We often are looking at ways of managing light pollution and promoting dark skies, but also doing this in sort of affordable and eco-friendly ways. Some of us are running projects around looking at astrotourism and trying to figure out ways in which this can support local communities in terms of income and economic growth. So I think a lot of these things are already happening. And today specifically, Astronomy for Development, and also some of the partners of the office, and particularly through this lens of gender equality and the focus on the important role that women are playing in this field of astronomy for development. So I'm based at the Office of Astronomy for Development, as Sarah said, and the office has been established for just over 10 years. It's a joint office between the International Astronomical Union and South Africa's National Research Foundation. And we're based in Cape Town on the grounds of the South African Astronomical Observatory. But we actually have a global mandate, and you can see this in terms of the regional offices. So there are 11 regional offices of astronomy for development spread across the globe, ranging from North America all the way through to our East Asian and Chinese language office. And this is because, as we all know, the priorities in terms of socioeconomic development across the world are very different, right? And of course, people do things in very different ways. So while we have a global mandate for socioeconomic development, the implementation of that mandate in local regions is often very different, and the priorities there are very different. One of the key ways in which we carry out the mandate of the Office of Astronomy for Development is through this call for proposals. And so the idea there is that we fund on-the-ground projects, and these can be proposed by any member of the community. It doesn't even have to be a member of the scientific community. It can be a member of the public as well. And these look specifically at ways of using astronomy to improve socioeconomic conditions in a region or potentially across the globe, something like that. In 2020, we ran a special call with our partners, the African Astronomical Society and the African Planetarium Association. That was specifically to try and mitigate some of the effects that people were experiencing because of COVID-related lockdowns and things. So that was a special call that we ran in addition to our usual call. And so overall, since 2013, when we first started dispersing funding for projects, we've dispersed €1 million now. And that's been dispersed through 200 projects in over 100 countries. And so I'm just going to give you a flavor of some of these projects. And of course, I'm going to highlight some of the projects that focus on gender equality. Although we have projects that focus across all of the SDGs, really. Mostly we end up with projects at the OAD supported that focus on things like quality education and reduced inequalities. So this particular project is about a girls' astronomy camp that was run in Nigeria in 2019, and again subsequently in a second round of proposals. And the idea is to have an all-girls camp which uses astronomy and stargazing as a gateway to allowing girls to explore the potential of a career in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And one of the real strong points of this project is that it sees this intervention not as only dealing with the girls who are making decisions about their futures, but also bringing into the conversation the parents, because as we understand, gender equality is a societal ambition rather than just being an intervention focused at girls. The other project that we've been supporting just last year is a project called Emerger. It's also focused on education. It's also based in Africa, this time in Kenya. This is run by Anne Jerry and some of her colleagues. Anne is a PhD student at the University of Manchester. And this project is really focusing on keeping girls in school in rural Kenya. So it turns out that actually only between 5 and 10% of girls actually complete a secondary education in Kenya. And through a process of mentorships, providing some small scholarships, some laboratory and computing equipment to schools, and through the sessions of computer literacy and training. This project is really focusing on trying to change that statistic. So whilst the project's only been running for just under a year now, Anne and her colleagues have been trying to measure the effectiveness of the project. And they've been doing this by actually probing what plans these girls had for their futures. And so just before they started this intervention, they said about 20% of the girls in these schools had a concise plan for their futures, whether or not that involved tertiary education or STEM subjects. And now, after this intervention, a much larger fraction, up to 90%, have got a clearer plan as to a future or a career. And then another project that has a global rollout in 2021 is this project called She Speaks Science. And this looked at promoting women in STEM through a combination of storytelling and mentorship. It was a project that had to pivot quite quickly due to the restrictions placed by COVID. So it moved to an online mentorship model. And they've engaged with about just over 30 women and girls from over 20 countries through this sort of 5-month mentorship program. So I think what's worth saying is that all of these 3 projects, which are just a handful of what we have funded through the OAD, have been run by women working in this astronomy for development space, and that look at interventions specifically for women. So just to give a breakdown of the statistics, these are our project leaders since the first call organized by gender. Here you can see that actually most of our project leaders are still men, but there's a significant fraction of women project leaders now. And we hope to, as we've brought a focus also onto gender equality, we hope this encourages a more gender equal approach also to proposing for the funding. So that's kind of a look at the work we've been doing at the Office of Astronomy for Development. I'm now going to broaden horizons a bit and talk about another initiative, the African Network of Women in Astronomy, which was established towards the end of 2020. And I'm part of this, the network here, which is led by Johanna. And it's an initiative really that aims to providing connection for women in astronomy and related fields in Africa. And it's been established as a subcommittee of the African Astronomical Society. And the idea is really, this is a sort of a depiction of an article that Johanna wrote, a commentary in Nature Astronomy a couple of years ago, just to show how the landscape of astronomy in Africa has changed significantly over the last decade. What you can see here are a range of existing and forthcoming infrastructure and human capacity development initiatives happening on the continent. And you can see that astronomy across the continent is really growing. And so for the first time, there's actually this very strong community of some young and some established astronomers, and with many PhD students or master students studying these related subjects. You can see here some of the images from previous schools that have been held on the continent. So the idea of the AFRI Society is very much to create those connections across the different phases of astronomy and to create that sense of community within Africa. So the activities that we've listed in the 3-year plan involve things like organizing a number of courses and training in different kinds of skills, looking at giving visibility to women in astronomy in Africa, and being a voice for making sure that women are part of the decision-making bodies as well when it comes to funding, infrastructure, that kind of thing. And in terms of research activities, it's also, we hope that it will provide a network for collaboration or for finding supervision if that's required. We also want to provide recognition to the hard work that's happening on the continent through 2 awards, an early career and a senior career award for women in astronomy, and then helping people to consolidate the efforts that they put into the organization of outreach activities for astronomy. And then finally, something we haven't gotten to yet, but we hope to get to in the next couple of years, is to build a better picture and an understanding of how we can account for and address the relatively low numbers of women in astronomy and space science in Africa. So the coordinating team is quite well geographically dispersed. It's led by Johanna. She's based in Ethiopia, and she also has a a visiting position in Andalusia. And then it's myself and Carolina, Priscilla and Nana, and we have a new member, I don't have a picture yet, Salma Sia, who is from Senegal. Our current status is that we have over 100 members from 40 different countries. And we have quite good representation of women and men. Of course, we have 80% women and 20% men, which I think is very exciting for us because, you know, it's very important that gender equality and promoting women in these fields is seen as a societal-wide initiative and not just as something for women to drive. So if you are interested in joining us, the website is there, www.afri.org, and there's a membership form. So now I think I'm just moving on to the section of the talk that is probably, I would have said, would have the most interest from Carolina, if she were around. But it's very much around women in data science, hackathons, and the kind of training that's required to run these programs. So we have a joint initiative actually with a number of partners. So the OAD with the Inter-University for Data Intensive Astronomy, and then some funding that is coming from the UK through the Star of Big Data project, which is specifically looking at running hackathons in some of the SKA partner countries. And the idea of the hackathons is to introduce the skills that you need in data science and machine learning, and how those can be applied both in the context of astronomy, but also in the context of socioeconomic development. And so this is a program that's actually supported by three of us, Anna Scaife from Manchester, Carolina, and myself, and is run by Nikita Madanpal, also based at the Office of Astronomy for Development. And you can see the pictures here are just illustrative of two of the examples. The black and white strip is showing you the classification of radio galaxies as FR1s or FR2s based on a machine learning algorithm. And then very similar classification of areas in the image below that have been subjected to flooding. So these are Earth observation images of a region, I think either in Mozambique or Puerto Rico, that had recently been subject to flooding. So again, very similar algorithm for classifying the kind of water levels in these images. And so in the last 3 or 4 years, a number of these kinds of hackathons have been run, largely to give the community, the growing astronomy community in Africa, a flavor for this kind of work that is necessary as part of astronomy, but that also allows you to develop skills broader than that, and that can be applied, of course, in industry and in data science. And based on a number of these workshops that had been run in this period, we had a report come out last year in March 2021 that was coordinated by Bonita de Swart from the South African Radio Observatory, and that looked specifically at the representation of women in these workshops. And so if you look at sort of data science and artificial learning as a field, you find that there's only about a quarter of the field is represented in terms of women, which I find is actually quite a strange thing, because I think a large number of these computational fields actually originated in a way as sort of women's work, right? In inverted commas. And so from the report, Bonita says at the current rate of the uptake of women in these fields, it'll take probably close on 100 years to close the gender gap. So just to sort of show the numbers, these two little bar charts show on the left-hand side the number of participants separated by gender. So female participants are highlighted in red here in the actual workshops. But then you can also see on the right-hand side, those three little bar charts here show the number of applicants by gender. And you can see that the program has worked pretty hard to get more applicants, but also more female applicants over the last 3 or 4 years. But that there still is a quarter to a half difference in the number of female to male participants or applicants to these programs. So the report is interesting because it makes a number of recommendations for these things. And I think some of these recommendations we've seen in so many places before. The important role of mentorship and these kinds of initiatives to young girls to encourage them to participate in these things. There's a number of other recommendations in terms of flexibility and work-life balance. Also, I think one of the recommendations that I feel quite strongly about is, the fact that this is a societal-wide issue and should be addressed at all levels rather than interventions that are only aimed at women. But maybe just to conclude, one of the outcomes of this workshop is to run an outcome of this report is to run a workshop at the 1-year anniversary, so that coincides with International Women's Day on the 8th of March, specifically an Africa Women in Data Science event. So one of these hackathons that will be supported through Dara Big Data and the Newton Fund, with computational support by IDEA and, of course, support from the OAD. And this is the website. We're just in the process of selecting candidates now and preparing for that workshop in just under a month's time. So I think this will be a very exciting space, and it will be quite interesting, I think, to get feedback from the participants of this workshop compared to previous workshops. So with that, I'm happy to conclude. I've put my contact details on this last slide. Please feel free to browse some of the other projects that we've run at the Office of Astronomy for Development. I've also put Carolina's contact details up. I'm sure she'd be very happy to respond to any questions. She's very sad that she can't be with us today, but I'm sure she'll be happy to respond via email. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you very much, Vanessa, for this extremely interesting talk. I really enjoyed it. And thank you for reminding us that astronomy is not only for its sake of itself, but it's also a societal impact. And it's an excellent way to teach or to develop skills that can then be used for development. If you have a question for Vanessa, raise your hand and someone will unmute you. Meanwhile, I have couple of questions for you. I actually have many, but I will start with just a curiosity. What brought you, because I never asked you, I realized I never asked you, what path brought you to work for Office for Development? Because that's kind of a, fundamental choice rather than going into research to do this. What was your path?
I think my path was a convoluted one, Sarah, because I was originally in research, and I still do some research these days, or it's not a lot. But I think what I was finding, I think the fundamental change was that, I seemed to know more and more about less and less, and moving across to the Office of Astronomy for Development was really an opportunity to broaden my horizons in an area that I had very little experience in. And I find I'm still quite inexperienced when it comes to understanding socioeconomic development and learning all of these things. So.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yes. So one more technical question that I have, which is something that I always struggle with whenever I'm also interested in this kind of not necessarily development, but general issue about astronomy for society, etc. What are the metrics that you're using to measure your activities? Because I always struggle whenever we have works or workshops or proposals or initiatives. How do we measure the output, the effectiveness?
Yeah, so I think that's an excellent question, and it's one that we are also struggling with. Because, when I present like a big overview like this, you can see that I can condense it nicely into, oh, we've spent €1 million and spend this. But if you think about how those euros have been spent, they're actually often chopped up into rather small grants of between like 3,000 and 5,000 euros. And then, you have to evaluate or measure the impact, on a very different scale than if you were spending, the €1 million. And we also find what's so interesting about it is that, it's just the diversity of the projects. We have projects that we fund that range from, schools where people will teach specific techniques in astronomy, to projects that are very clearly in the sort of primary school and literacy area. Then we have some other projects that look at displaced people and how astronomy can, help them in terms of mental health or providing a structure to their time. So just the huge range of projects makes it very difficult to come up with one way of measuring an impact or evaluating project success. So I think we have a number of different ways of doing that. We have, based at the Office of Astronomy for Development, a development economist, Tawanda Chingosa, and we also have a number of fellows who've helped us set up some of these key metrics, and whether these metrics are in some cases, they might be case studies of particular projects. In other cases, they might be more numerical, like how many people you have reached over some, given time frame. But we find that, we have to be quite flexible in the approach that we use, because we both have to cater for people who are spending their time and not always a huge amount of money in running these projects.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the OAD that's running the projects, it's individuals that are passionate that are running these. And then at the end of the day, reporting on what the potential impact is. So I think it's the same even with science, right? You have to have a mixture of numbers and a mixture of explanations, right? Because it's case studies as well as numbers.
Yeah, I guess with science, we're more used to the metrics we use to measure the output, whereas in things we're not so expert in, we struggle, at least I struggle. I'm not so familiar with ways. But do you publish the reports about your metrics? You mentioned you're the person who's helping you, sorry, I forgot the name right away, doing so. Does the Office for Development publish reports about this, or some sort of documentation that you could share?
Yeah, so there's a lot of documentation on our website about ways of monitoring projects and evaluating their success. And then, of course, if you want to know about specific projects that we funded, we also have those reports available, and we have an annual report as well.
Thank you. Okay, so any questions from the audience? Raise your hand if you want to ask a question to Vanessa about her talking about the work for Astronomy for Development. Otherwise, I'm just going to go on and ask more questions. But
if you want, if I can, I have a question both for all of you. So both for Vanessa, for Sarah. I see also some people working on this questions at the level of the Italian community. So my question is, what is the fraction of men working in this field? Because you mentioned before that this is important, that this issue, also the fact, bringing to the attention the fact that the gender gap is an issue and something that needs to be somehow solved. It's important that men work actively on this and raise awareness of the problem. So my question is for you and all people involved here in these questions is, how many men are working in the field?
So I think quite a few, actually. So in terms of our project proposers, you can see that most of them are actually men, or have been men in the last 10 years or so that we've been dispersing funding. And of course, we also have, a number of men who help to initiate, the whole field. So I think it's not an overwhelmingly, female field or anything like that.
Okay.
I think the director of the office, Kevin Govender, is a man, and of course we had George Miley, I think, who's sort of was instrumental in setting up the IAU's Office of Astronomy for Development. So I think a lot of these ideas are kind of, gender neutral anyway. So I don't know if that really answered your question.
Yes, partially, yeah.
I think in Europe at least it's a little different, perhaps also in the US, as far as I can tell. Generally, whenever there are working groups or organizations or efforts aimed at raising the awareness of the gender gap or working to improve the gender balance, they are very female dominated. It's truly astonishing, given, I would say most of the equality initiatives are dominated by minorities, not necessarily women, but by minorities. So
this per se is a big issue, a big problem.
It is a big issue. Yes, that's one of the problems. But I think it's getting better. I remember the first couple of years in which I was interested in this, it was really just, it was truly limited to minorities. Now it's getting better, and I'm hoping this will make it better. I think the work that Vanessa and the Office for Development are doing is terrific in this regard, and Kevin, of course, because this is giving a different approach, also in terms of showing that the people working on it are not only minority members, which I think is important. But I do take your issue, Marco, and I did observe similar things, but I'm hopeful that things will get better.
Thank you.
Any more questions from the audience? If not, last opportunity. If not, let me thank Vanessa again, and Carolina, even if she could not be here. I know she participated in putting together the talk. And thank you so much. And I will be in touch. And as she gave their contact, I encourage you to get in touch with her. If you have questions about the work of Office for Development, they really do amazing things. So I think you should, if you're interested in learning more, you can go to the website that she said, or get in touch with her, Carolina. Thank you again for attending, and thank you very much, Vanessa, for giving this great talk. And we will all see you at the next Laura Bassi colloquium, which will be in